My name is Shanta Martin. I'm a partner at Lee Day and I'm also a board member of CORE. One of the things that has been going on, I think, for decades, and actually beyond certainly the last 10 years, which is, I think, when there's been a sort of increased interest in issues of corporate accountability, but as I say, the issues have been going on for quite a long time, is that people who are living in developing country contexts, so countries where the rule of law perhaps is not as strong as in other countries which are often very rich in resources, that often what is happening is that people who live on the land that contains those resources are often actually those who get the least benefit out of the exploitation of those resources. And there's been a particular emphasis on the exploitation of minerals and oil and gas in countries where people whose lives are affected by the exploitation are often left to the wayside in terms of looking at the way in which development occurs. And so you often get circumstances where the local communities are negatively affected by the exploitation of oil, gas, and other minerals, whether that be gold, coal, iron ore, various minerals that are obviously quite essential to many of the things that we in countries such as the UK require and obviously use a lot of. What often happens is that the exploitation of those minerals and resources results in people either being perhaps pushed off their land. They may or may not be consulted in the process of deciding whether or not there should be exploitation of those minerals. If they don't have much say in that exploitation process, they may have their rights infringed by way of, for example, the lack of free, prior and informed consent, which is a right of Indigenous peoples. They may also find that their use of the land is severely inhibited, so whether that's because they themselves are moved off the land or the areas that are going to be exploited are areas that they would otherwise use. So, for example, whether that's forests, it may be that they rely on water sources that would be negatively affected by the exploitation of those natural resources. So people who live in the surrounding areas are finding often that their rights are very negatively impacted by the exploitation of natural resources, but they're also not being listened to very much, whether that be by the company or by their own government, and find themselves in positions of extreme vulnerability where if they are then negatively impacted, they have their rights to livelihood or their rights to life or their right to personal security impacted, they find themselves very limited in terms of their capacity to enforce those rights. And in those circumstances, they may, for example, seek to go to their own government to try to enforce or help them to protect their rights. But their own government may also be approving the exploitation that they're complaining about. And it's that dilemma that is often the circumstance that leads to cases being brought in countries such as the United Kingdom, where you have companies from the United Kingdom involved in that exploitation. So people who are living in countries as diverse as whether it's South Africa, Zambia, Ivory Coast, Peru, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, from all over the world, might then actually bring a case in the United Kingdom trying to have their rights protected because they've found that they've been incapable of getting that protection in their own country. So when you get circumstances where people are having their rights negatively impacted by the actions of corporations, and particularly British corporations, in countries where there is perhaps the weak rule of law, where governments might be themselves implicated in the negative repercussions that people are experiencing, and where there may not be the most reliable judicial system, people find that they then will turn to other options. When the opportunity arises to then, for example, protect their rights by way of issuing legal action in the United Kingdom, that is something that people will pursue. In that circumstance where there is a need for people who are in quite a vulnerable position to try and access the courts in the United Kingdom, it's so important that there is a greater awareness of the circumstances that people are actually experiencing. There's an important aspect to building not only the legal system and ensuring that there is some access to courts here, but there's an important aspect about building awareness amongst politicians, amongst the general public, for why access to the courts here is such an important avenue for people who are experiencing the negative impacts of British companies abroad. One of the things that CORE does is to raise that awareness both within the public but also specifically with government, with politicians who might otherwise not be so focused on why the courts of the United Kingdom are such an important asset and an important avenue for justice for those who are affected negatively abroad. One of the things that CORE does is bring these issues of, for example, individuals who are suffering from maltreatment in different parts of the world, bringing their stories to the fore, making those stories not just important and understandable from a personal perspective, but linking them to why policy changes might be necessary, why legal changes might be necessary to ensure greater access to justice and to the ability of all of us to contribute to the rule of law being something that is better applied throughout the world.